Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is Listening Beyond the Soundbite. Joining me today is Guy Page. He's here as a guest co-host. Thank you, Guy.
Sure.
And continuing with our candidate interviews is Kevin Doering, who's an independent. He's running for the House of Representatives in Orange, Washington, Addison District. So do you know all the names of that district? Can you rattle them off?
Oh, boy. Already. Granville, Roxbury, Brookfield, Braintree, and Randolph.
Oh, excellent. You'll be a big hit on the floor of the House. That's a good thing. Because some of these people have 4 and 5 and 6, and
That's
they just
right.
rattle them off.
That's right.
So anyway, could you introduce yourself to our audience and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Kevin Doering, as already said. I moved here from Maine in 2002. I worked in the state of Maine for several years, and prior to that I had a federal position down in New York, but my family's all in Maine. Came here and I followed a pledge from my wife that I would not run for office. In Maine, I was a chair of the select board, chair of the planning board, I was on the library board with her, and I was on the Cumston Hall rebuilding project. And my wife sort of pointed out with our young children that I was not home more than one night a week. So she asked me, and I said I would keep that pledge. All my kids were getting ready until they went to college. I loved raising kids. It was a privilege. And now one's actually moving to London. And another one is Zooming her college classes to California because she can't go there, even though she earned a scholarship. So I do want to share one other thing in opening, if I can, because I said that I hadn't run for any office locally. However, I want people to know that I've been involved in the community, and I've enjoyed it. So I ran the Carol Sing in the center for 7 or 8 years. That's the biggest get-together thing we have every year. I also wrote a book with Mim Herwig. Maybe some of you will remember her name, the historian from Randolph Center. Co-wrote a book on weather. I took over her column, and I've written for the Herald of Randolph now for 17 years. No kidding. Which I've really enjoyed too. And then one other thing I'm willing to share is my disaster relief experience, which I don't make a big deal about, but I've been down to New Orleans there after Katrina, but also served with flood relief in Vermont twice, in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, tornado relief in Connecticut. And these are exciting things. I could talk about it too much, but it won't be about the House. But I enjoy that kind of work where you just go and help people that have had a disaster laid on them, and all they want are helping hands and sometimes just a hug. Which we can't do in COVID now, but so that's a little bit about me.
Who did you do that with?
That was with the Red Cross and also a church organization, New England Baptist, I think, Association. So as a volunteer, got a great.
I've seen their teams all over Vermont.
Yeah, yellow shirts.
Right.
Yep. So that was an excellent thing. I got involved with that about probably 14 years ago or so.
So you were here with Tropical Storm Irene.
I was here for Irene.
Well,
I was on WDEV actually live.
were you?
Well, I'm a meteorologist. I didn't. So I have written that. One of the columns I've written is the weather column. I also write the local Randolph Center News.
Great.
Yeah.
Because seriously, the south of in Vermont was just devastated. I went to one town. I can't remember what. It was all gray. The whole place was just gray from the soot and the whatever else the storm brought in. There was no color anywhere. You just sort of rode in this grayness. It was pretty scary.
Well, I think from an atmospheric point of view, we had 7 or 8 inches of rain already that month before Irene. So the streams were high. If it happened now, we wouldn't have nearly the same damage.
Right.
But the streams were very high, and then the pouring, because of our geography, the pouring of 7 inches of rain, most of which fell in 2 to 4 hours. I literally had standing water on my property, and I'm at 1,400 feet. So I'm reporting live to WDEV from Randolph Center, and I'm standing in boots, bean rubber boots, at 1,400 feet because the rain came down so hard. We didn't have a stream near my house, but it just could not subside. The ground was saturated. So yeah, it was a disaster magnified by geography because, as you know, the water rushes down our
because I know
hills.
they were watching it, and they assumed it was going to turn right. And I think a few people were a little surprised when it turned left and came straight up Vermont.
Yeah, and not fast enough. Not one of these quick, get announced. It was here for a while.
So, Kevin, speaking of disasters, in a legislative sense, what do you think about? We have a pension problem. We have an underfunded pension problem here in the state of Vermont. $4.5 billion underwater, so to speak. Any thoughts about what you would bring to any ideas that maybe that would help with the state's underfunded pension problem?
Well, I have a list of budget stuff,
Okay.
priorities, how to look at budgets. It's not as detailed on pension. I'm a person who I can share with you just directly, thinks we should not spend a dime more than we take in, just like any average Vermont family.
Right.
We have to find cuts if we do increases. I also believe in keeping legal and contractual commitments. So that would mean reviewing what you just asked from a pension point of view very carefully and making sure you had legal support on reviewing that. And what does that mean for what a governor and a legislature can do to look at that problem?
Right.
So I think that's the nature of not only Vermont, but the nation right now. We are overspending without a recourse to the future of how we can do that. So,
Yeah, good.
but it's a great question in terms of that.
What are some of the areas that Vermont maybe needs to rein in the spending a little bit?
Well, might get a little controversial for some, but in education, I think we could, I'm a fan of what the governor has said in terms of looking at the holistic bill from K through 12 and even into our
Higher ed.
higher education colleges. So I was involved, I taught at VTC for a couple of years too, by the way, so I
bless you.
really
We
was
love tech ed
support.
on the show.
And their job placement record is fantastic. So for us to drop support for them, as a meteorologist, I got into Linden, by the way, it's now the NBU at Linden State years ago, but one of the best meteorological atmospheric science programs in the
Yes,
nation.
very good.
That's right,
And we would
exactly.
lose it.
Yep.
People turn on the Weather Channel and they have Linden graduates.
Yes.
So going back, what was your issue? Oh, where would we look? So we're spending, as far as I know, about $1.81 billion on education in the state right now, K through 12. Now, when I arrived in 2002, we were spending about 1.4, 1.5 billion or something around that mark, but we had 100,000 K through 12 students. Now we're less than 80,000 K through 12
And we're
students.
spending more money, a lot more money.
And we're spending 0.4 billion
Per-
more. So,
per pupil
so our
went higher.
cost per pupil, if you just did a basic calculator math, and I'm not going to say that I'm the expert, so someone may say it's really 18.8 or whatever, but if the average Vermonter just got their calculator out and put 1.81 billion in and 80,000 approximate public
Right,
school students, you'd get over $20,000 per.
Right.
So the question is, are we getting the bang for the buck there? At the same time, there's a Blue Ribbon Commission, you might know that, looked into early childhood learning.
Right.
As a parent and a teacher myself, I'm also a teacher, I so believe in the early kids. You know,
I do
they're so important, and we found out from a science standpoint that 95% of their brain development, where they're going is 0 through 5. So if we get them at those ages with the early child care and educational support. Now, I had the luxury of having an incredible wife at home who was able to work part-time, be with our children when they were young. We read to them all the time. We played classical. We did a lot of different things, but we spent time. There are so many Vermont families, excuse me for getting water, but so many Vermont families that are so struggling for time. We're
Right,
two
right.
people working, single parent working,
right.
does not have that time to put into the kids. So we look at the child care, excuse me, and there was a Blue Ribbon Commission, and they said 205 million to equalize this, and I immediately thought, wow. So I went and talked to some child care providers, including one I know who stuck through COVID, kept doing her job, a fantastic young lady who really talked a lot about it. And she said, no, it's not direct additional money, but it's how government would work to help subsidize those that couldn't pay enough. So if you made a 6-figure salary, you would pay 10% or something like that. But what she was telling me was a family with 2 workers,
Right.
both working, average income in Vermont spends over 40% on child care if they have 2 children
For sure.
that
It's
need it.
very expensive
So
here.
it just bludgeons your budget. She said, yeah, the Blue Ribbon Commission was like at 43%. So it drops as your income goes up. But the point is, why not take the governor's approach and look at the holistic spending? The same thing on the other end, the higher education spending, which I get enthused about spending so much, so just slow me down if I get too fired up. But no, if we take the higher end, we've been ranked pretty low, I think, as a lot of people know.
Oh, yeah.
And we're like 49th, sometimes 50th,
Right.
depending on the polls.
Right.
We can do a lot more than that without killing the budget. But I don't claim to know the constitutionality of that. Like we have arguments now about the global climate change constitutionality. I can talk about that as well. But we don't have a clear basis right now that I know of. And I trust this governor a lot. He's done this isn't your question, but I just add one thing. With this pandemic, he and Dr. Levine and the
They've done a
leadership
great job.
we're like second to none.
Yeah.
You know, I went to visit my family in Maine when the things settled down a little bit, and I got like saluted at the border. Oh, you have green plates.
Come on.
Welcome. You're from Vermont, the Green Mountain State. You know,
right.
I could go home and feeling, this is good. You know.
Yeah.
But I think there's got to be money there, and that means lifting up the 0 to 5, lifting up the families with the young children, also capturing and helping our young Vermonters. That's another reason I'm running, by the way. Ben Jickling, who I feel like this is a replacement for his seat. He was a young Vermont guy, college, tech, reform taxes. We're not talking about that a lot in our district. Reforming taxes, property taxes. I'm not answering your question again. I'm diverging because I'm excited about running and I have a lot to say.
Sure.
But I'll share this with you very quickly, a statistic. Since I moved here and bought a house in Vermont, my property taxes have tripled, okay? And I'm not complaining about the services, but the services are no real different. People work hard and they provide what they can, but families cannot keep up with tripling tax rates. My salary isn't much higher. In fact, I changed careers and became a teacher and took a pay cut. So it's a long story, and my personal story isn't important, but what is important is the average Vermont family trying to keep their homes, some of which are older, keep them up to speed, keep up with codes and regulations, pay their taxes, and pay budget stuff that is not always affordable. So,
boy, good point.
There's a lot could be done with
You remember, Governor Douglas always used to push with the expenses of K through 12. He would map it out, very high bubble, and then we would pay hardly anything to higher ed, like
That's
UVM.
right.
And he just kept saying, like you're doing, push the bubble down and let that money go to higher ed, because I think our contribution to UVM is like minuscule. It's like nothing.
It is.
It's embarrassing if they're supposed to be a state school. And they struggle, and then they have to get money from other sources. Anyway, I always liked when he brought that chart out and showed how to swoosh it down and move it out.
Do you mind if I address one other budget possibility?
No, go
Because I
ahead.
think you put that, you opened the door a little bit.
Yeah,
You decide
yeah.
pension, and I think Lake Champlain is another example. This is an environmental
issue.
thing. So we have the EPA, federal force, kind of looking at us. I have a background with environmental protection, having worked in the state of Maine for the Department of Environmental Protection. So, but I like to look at this in a balanced way, because everything we do has an economic consequence. So it's like I've always told my students, and I also taught at Champlain, like follow the money.
Right.
I tell the high school students, follow the money. Why are we doing it this way? I said, just look at the money. Research the money. Don't hit Wikipedia and just get your first site. Dig, a little bit. But the phosphorus thing is something that I see as a win-win if we do it right. We want to help Vermont farmers, right? We want agriculture to stay here. But what we've been looking at a lot is very expensive other things, like wastewater treatment plants. And if you have a parking lot that's a certain size,
that's
all
a new
well-intended,
thing.
The bang for the buck, I just want to share with you and my the people that are watching, the bang for the buck is agriculture. And how do you do that? Support farming, support agriculture, figure out ways to keep the manure and the overrunning of phosphorus into the lake. Get a lot more bang for the buck and a win-win with our farming community than spending a ton of money drafting new legislation that sinks into local businesses, and we're moving towards home ownership. We'll be looking at your driveway size. I mean, I don't want to be radical on it, but I mean, we need to be pragmatic, especially in a pandemic when we have limited resources. We're worried about people's health, and there's so much on the line for the average homeowner and the average property
and
owner.
Lake Champlain is such an economic driver.
Yep.
I mean, it impacts all of Vermont.
Exactly.
From top to bottom.
So I think if we could move that money, again, savings, you're thinking about savings. There's savings to be made there, but we don't want to lose Lake Champlain. It's an incredible resource. We drink water from it. We recreate on it. However, it can be done in a much more cost-effective way, I believe.
Okay.
Because I think the EPA, if I may, is sort of threatening to come in and fix it for us and then give us the bill. And we would have no say about that. So I don't know how we'd have been staving them off all these years.
If I had the honor and privilege to be elected from this group, I will share with you, I worked for the EPA years ago. That was the federal job, so I have connections.
Yes.
Well, I won't pretend.
Valuable.
I won't pretend I have connections. What I will say definitively is I understand how they work.
Right.
I understand their programs. I put 7 years in the New York City office, and I know
that's
a lot. So that was when I left Maine. And they said, don't go. But I had these aspirations. I want to get to the big, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. But no, it taught me a lot, and I you know, it's carried
Just to
to this day.
understand their thinking would be a big help.
I do. I think I could, you know, I'd like to, the other thing I'd like to try to do is mediate. That's why I'm running as an
Yeah.
independent. We have such a big gap. I don't want to take time away from your questions, but there's
No.
such a huge gap
We
between.
used to mediate, we stopped doing that.
Well, you know, Vermont was a citizens' legislature. It mattered. You worked, you served, and you went back to your job, whatever.
Right,
Now,
right.
for many cases, I'm not being negative, but people
Career.
get the state plates on, and it becomes their life. And maybe they're trying their best and serving, but I think fresh influx of ideas, new thoughts and stuff, moving people in and out. But which is why, you know, term limits could be an issue discussed as well. And it's also tough for people to run every 2 years. I'm learning about running.
Right.
Money, and I could go on and on with that because I don't have a lot of money.
Well, I think we hit up the same small businesses every 2 years, and I'm sure they're sick of it.
I'm not hitting up anyone,
Yeah,
and I'm
good
not,
for
and
you.
I'm not being able to spend a lot of money. I got a few signs, and it's challenging. I found out just a mailing. I couldn't do. I can't tell my wife that I want to spend that much in a mailing when we're trying to support a kid in college, another one who wants to get married. There's a ton of things on our plate to do. We have an older house. I have a friend right now putting up the post specs. We could restore it to its historical integrity. So.
It's a challenge.
Speaking of taxes, there's some talk about carbon tax coming, where basically at the pump, we'd be paying an extra, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 cents to pay for helping Vermont being less reliant on transportation. What do you think about that idea, the carbon tax?
I'm not an expert in the carbon tax. What I do feel very strong in is my background, or what I would think about the whole global climate change in the first place, because the carbon tax flows from climate change.
Right.
And I will say that we have enough instances of climate change that we can look at. Scientifically, you can't state this fire, this heat, this whatever is climate change, period. But you can look holistically and overall at 3,000 weather stations across the globe, and the fact that sea surface temperatures are rising. The Gulf of the Atlantic was the highest recorded temperature. That's why a recent Hurricane Teddy was able to make it as a hurricane all the way up to Nova Scotia, because it could draw strength from the Atlantic, which is usually the Gulf thing. So I know I'm staying on the science a little. I want to get back to your point. But I think in terms of what we're doing, pragmatism, economy is important. So the governor's been working very hard, I know, to convert our fleet of state vehicles and make incentives for Vermonters to get electric vehicles. That's reasonable, okay? These are the kinds of things that I would look to try to do. I have a community that has a lot of people that are poor. They drive older vehicles. They try to keep them on the road. In fact, they're losing vehicles to rust because we put too much salt in the road, in my opinion, but that's,
Oh, interesting.
you know, and if you're very wealthy, you can change your car or lease it. But if you're the average Vermonter trying to keep, I drove here today in my 180,000 mile, 15-year-old
Just
truck.
getting warmed up.
You just get out, that's right. But no, the point is that we need to think about the average common person trying to survive, you know. And I went and I saw someone yesterday, and I picked up some signs, and they just had to have their property drilled for a well because their water ran out. The stream they worked from went dry. So that's a climate thing this summer. It's been a pretty warm summer, you know. But it costs money. I mean, and that guy with the capital with that truck, cost him a ton of money to get that. So I think I'm a fan of that, of working slowly and pragmatically forward. I'm a fan of how Vermont is built compared to other states. We are made for climate change. In other words, we can be local. COVID-19 has had more people telecommuting. We can travel when we need to, not every day automatically. Right. We can keep businesses and help them in downtowns. We can put housing in down. We don't have to do as much driving per mile while we're driving combustion vehicles still, because the other thing I want to say is, and I think this will make sense, Vermont doesn't control the entire transportation economy, unfortunately. You know, if we try to say we're going to do something, California is 800 times our size.
Yeah, I was going to say by size, I have the impression that no matter what we do everything you can do in global warming and changing, it won't change the needle one bit because of our size, will it?
Well, if you look at the emission budget, the whole carbon emission budget in the United States, Vermont is very, very tiny.
And so we could stand on our heads and do whatever. And, I mean, it's a good thing to do, but it won't change anything.
There is one good thing that we can do, which we've done in a lot of areas of government and the people, because the people are resilient and strong in this state, is we can still be a leader. The tiny state of Vermont can do things and be out in front.
Well, I think
but
that's
they can
what
be
they
they can be a pragmatic. Well, that's going back to your carbon tax. Is that the way to lead? Is a carbon tax on the average Vermonter who is has to drive, like the contractors who have to drive every day, the essential workers, the people who are going to get our food to us, and the farmers and the people buying equipment, all those people who are driving vehicles, whether they can withstand that cost, that's the essential question. If we can't do it fairly, it gets very complicated. Doing it fairly. I might be one who would say, and maybe this would surprise people as an independent moderate, if you were wealthy enough, you wanted to volunteer at the pump, I'll put in 5 cents a gallon because taxes are lower right now, and I'll contribute to this fund. But if you're a single mom driving in there with 2 kids and you've got childcare and you're going to your job right now and you're hoping you can afford to meet your basic bills, no, I don't think so. So I will share about the climate change thing, one more thing if you don't mind, and that is the governor tried to be, he's a progressive governor in my book for a Republican. He is trying to reduce carbon emissions. He's trying to have Vermont be a leader, but he recently vetoed the bill.
So in you mentioned the global warming solutions, which is sort of intertwined with what you're talking about now.
Sure.
That's going to cost us a few bucks. And my take is, why not get the economy up and running first? Why not do the things we need to do with the pension, Lake Champlain, and then if we want to focus on climate change, if it's not going to move the needle, isn't that a better approach or not?
Well, I have a question to ask you, if it's all right,
Sure,
because I don't
please.
feel like I'm an expert in the carbon tax. I feel like I'm very knowledgeable about weather, and I feel like I'm knowledgeable about budgeting, okay, in that sense. I've done budgeting, by the way, also at a federal, state, and local level as a chair of the select board, so I have some background with that. But I want to share this. The carbon tax, I'm hearing back and forth in the legislature right now.
Yeah, it's been going on for years.
One of the representatives in my district, and I'm not going to name names, who voted to override the governor's veto, whatever, a couple of them, I think both overrode,
a lot of them
have said this is not a carbon tax. Why are people saying it's a carbon tax? There's no carbon tax. This is about the Citizens Board, which the governor doesn't like as well, putting them in charge and holding us accountable to the reductions. So do either of you really know, is there a tax embedded in that bill, the 5 or 10 or 15 cents? Because I haven't read the whole bill.
Supposedly,
I don't mind asking.
no. Supposedly, what this doesn't have the ability to do, these 22 folks cannot levy a tax. However, there will be an infrastructure of staff and everything, and to support and pay for these people and for everything they do. So that money's going to have to come from somewhere. That's probably $1 million just to start it right there.
Yeah, anyway.
And people are upset about that, myself included, because they are not elected. There's no requirements in there about who should be on the committee. And if we get I don't think there's any.
No, it says that the governor will support some, and the legislature.
It's the usual split up of who gets to nominate who.
Well, but there isn't any, I believe, those folks don't need to come back to either the executive branch or the legislature and say, this is what we want to do.
That's the issue.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
And my understanding
and who are
is,
they?
no, my understanding it's a 23-person board.
Yeah.
15 are selected by the legislature, 8 by the governor's office.
In other words.
So one of the governor's problems is, and this is legit, is I was elected to run an administration. I have people, I have a natural resources group, I have an air program. There needs to be a balance. That's not a balance, okay? And our citizens legislature some might say is a little out of balance right now.
And I will guarantee you, many of us will know those names on that committee.
Yes.
It'll be the same.
Oh, sure.
Same old gang.
Well,
doing their thing.
What he's saying is that if I read the bill in this part, because I'm not an expert in the numbers, the tax numbers, but I have looked into some aspects of the gubernatorial aspect, because Governor Scott has said he thinks it's unconstitutional.
Yeah, because it's taking power away from him.
Right, and so I think whether that gets to be weaves into courts or not, or the lawyers' comment on that, is one thing. What I want to share is I get what he said when he said this. There are 15 people there, the legislature. I get 8. It only takes 12 to make every decision.
Right.
So automatically the executive is at a. You might as well just run with what they're
23,
doing.
I thought it was 24, but it doesn't matter. It's semantics. Somewhere above 20. To get 20 people to agree. I mean, we've been on boards on workforce development where the whole room is a board. And you can't agree on anything forever. So anyway, I just will look conscious of the time. I wanted to ask you about ethics, and it's a big issue for Campaign for Vermont and for this state, for this show. There's a bill which has very little clout, much of anything in it that's got to do with ethics, and we'd like to see it shored up and have some teeth and make people accountable for what they're voting on, and if they have any conflict of interest, stand up. What do you think about that?
as someone who was elected in local offices in Maine and who's also served in state government here in Vermont, and who is a teacher, all these professions have ethics attached to them. So if you're an appointed official in Vermont and state government by Governor Scott, you've got to sign an ethical charge. So if you're a teacher, you have a licensing, you have a certain ethical code.
Right.
Almost every profession we name, probably plumbing and electrical contracting even, you know, there's certain things they can and can't do. You can't go in, you can't have a plumber rewire your house.
Right.
So I think it's a straightforward issue. I don't think I'm an expert in that either. And by the way, I want to share with everyone, I have a lot to learn, but I want to, but I love to learn. But to get back to your question and your answer, I think that the same ethical charges that apply to these other professions, people in government, should apply to everyone who's serving the representatives. You are a representative of the citizens of this state. Certainly take it, and that should be stocks, holdings, financial, conflicts of interest if you worked in a company or know someone. I think that Scott even withdrew for something
Oh
he
yes, he has a
whatever.
construction company and had some contracts given to him.
And we've had some people in the legislature who've been upfront about it, I think, and stated
Well,
with it.
in fairness to Governor Scott, it was a whole process, so it wasn't that they just selected him. He wound up being the low bid.
Right.
But should he have been in the bid, who knows?
Yep.
Anyway, I think when you're going back to the constitutional issue about the global warming thing, I'm just skipping back in my head, will be really interesting to see. Because apparently they took legislation, they took something away from the legislature, but that's okay, but not the governor. So I thought that was really interesting. I want to give you the last minute or so we have here to talk about why folks should vote for you and why you would be the best candidate to be sent to State House.
Well, thank you very much for having me, by the way, and I've enjoyed the conversation. I think that we need a moderate from my group. I will share there's a good, solid Democratic constituency. They're the ones who sort of get to the polls, and that's fine. But there's an underserved part of the population that when you drive through the back roads that are not always getting to vote, maybe they will this year with the mail-ins or whatever. I want to represent those people. I want to represent the young people who I've talked to, and they don't always raise every social issue as their greatest concern, by the way. And we didn't even get to talk about race
They've
and
had
what's
to pay
happening.
off college tuition.
I've talked to, I mentored a lot of them, and I've taught some of them, and I've been trying to talk to some by phone during this pandemic. What I'm hearing is, can I rent? Can I get better classes in the tech school? How can I find a good job? I really love Vermont. I want to stay here. My two kids, anecdotally, you know, my daughter said she wanted more diversity, so she applied to schools both in Vermont and California. She says she wants to come back, but she wants to learn more from a California school. So my son is, as I said, is not. He looked for jobs in Vermont. So I feel passionate about the young Vermonters. I feel passionate about supporting what the governor says with vulnerable people, and I want to boost the economy. And I want to stand for Vermont businesses that are here that have struggled through COVID.
That's great. Kevin, thank you very much for coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Guy, for being here. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.